My topic is Who Are You, God? And I would like to look this weekend at three different topics, looking at who God is, what is His will for my life, and what does it look like when we live it out. Is there an example for us to look at? So that would be the hope to this for this weekend. I'd like to start off with a little bit more of a lighthearted story that I came across. My children found it in the fish wrapper. I don't know if you guys ever hear the fish wrapper, but it's something that gets passed around. I know different people will get it, but it's a story that comes from the fish wrapper, and it's about two guys that were in a restaurant, and the one guy was a little thirsty, and he didn't have any money to buy a drink, so he thought he'd play a little game with his friend. He said, "Hey, buddy, I'd like to do a little game with you." And he said, "Okay, what's the game?" He said, "What we're going to do is we're going to ask ourselves questions, and then we need to answer our question, and we're going to keep going that way until one of us asks ourselves a question that we can't get an answer for." And so the friend's like, "That's sort of a funny game, isn't it?" And but I'll do it. He said, and so the winner has to buy the guy a drink. So all right. So since it's your job, you go first. This is your game. You go first. So he said, "All right. This is my question. My question is this: how would a groundhog dig a hole into the ground without getting any dirt on the outside of the hole?" And he said, "My answer to myself is this: the groundhog will need to start on the inside and dig out." And his buddy says, "Well, how's he going to do that?" He said, "I don't know. That's your question." In life, we have a lot of questions. And I know as a young person especially, I wrestle with a lot of questions in life. What's the answer here? What's the answer to life? What does all this stuff mean? How do I figure out what's right and wrong, really? Well, I think the question that we're looking at here is probably one of the most foundational questions you ever have to answer in life. Who is God? Who is He? Because the answer to this question is going to affect every other aspect of your life. How you handle your time, how do you handle your relationships, how you handle your money, how you handle your body, really how you view eternity itself. It comes from the answer of how we answer the question, who is God? I'd like to start off by looking at a verse in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 6. And this here is what we often call the faith chapter, as we look at many people in the past who walked faithfully with God, and we see God's faithfulness to them as well. But in the middle of this is verse 6, and I'd like to just start with that. And it says this, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6, it says this: "But without faith it is impossible to please Him. For he that cometh to God must believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of them that diligently seek Him." Without faith, it is impossible to please Him. That's a pretty strong word, isn't it? Impossible. Josh talked about faith, the importance of faith last night. Well, in these verses, it gives us two things that are involved with this. It says that he that cometh to him must believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of them that diligently seek Him. The question I have for you is this: do you believe that God exists? That's what it says here. Must believe that He is. Do you believe that God exists? We come from a background that we were probably taught a lot of this, and we were raised to believe that God exists. And so maybe it's not a question that we wrestle with so much, but maybe we do. I remember I was about 16 years old, and I went down to Philadelphia to pass out tracts with our church. And it was sort of exciting. I'd never done this before, you know. I was got into the big city, and we were there passing out tracts, and I'm ready to get, spread the word here. Spread the word. We're spreading the word. And an older man walked up to me and began talking to me. And I came to realize that this man was an atheist. I was like, I never met one of those before. How do I answer this guy? And he began asking me all kinds of questions that I had no idea how to answer. And it sort of sent me on a little bit of a journey from my life. What do I really believe here? What is actually the truth here? And he had a lot of questions that I didn't know exactly how I should answer him. And one of the questions that was raised is this: that if God exists, then show him to me. You say God exists, right? God exists. Then show him to me. And the idea is this: when we went through the line this morning for breakfast, and we had this beautiful food laid out before us, and we say, "Who made this wonderful meal? Can you show him to me?" And we can look back. There's the wonderful cooks back there. Thank you so much. You did a wonderful job. Nice to meet you. Well, we say that God exists, then show him to me. Well, if I could go back there and talk with that man again, I would have maybe asked him this: "Sir, you believe in the Big Bang, is that correct? You believe in the Big Bang? Could you show it to me?" No, of course not. What he would do is try to give evidence for the existence of what he believed. Well, our faith that we believe is not based on some pie in the sky, sweet by and by till I die. Our faith in what we believe is based on the truth. And that's what verse 1 says here. It says that now faith is a substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. You see, our faith is not based on something we just hope for. It is based on evidence, on what is true. Well, when we look at the existence of God, there are three main arguments that are often given for the existence of God. One of them is this: is that you cannot have something from nothing. Okay? No matter how much you slice something down, there is always something there. I think it's over in France. They have this atom smasher. And they're trying to smash these atoms together and trying to find what they call the God particle. And they think if they could just find the smallest of bits, then they could understand where this universe came from. If we could just find this, then we could understand where it all came from. But even if they find this God particle, it would still be something, wouldn't it? You cannot get something from nothing. And so it would seem to me that there's only two possibilities: that either this universe is eternal, or there is an eternal being that spoke this world into existence. Now, one of the problems you have with an eternal universe is what you learn in school called the second law of thermodynamics. Does anyone know what that second law of thermodynamics says? Basically, everything is going downhill. It's not getting better, it's getting worse. And if you don't believe it, just look into the mirror. My hair is coming out here and coming out my ears. Man. I'm shaving my ears. I'm dying. That's what's going on. And if the world was eternal, it would have destroyed itself an eternity ago, you see. And so you cannot have something from nothing. There has to be something behind that. Nothing plus nothing does not equal something. It equals nothing. And so that's one evidence that's often given for the existence of God. A second one is this, is that whenever you see information, you always assume there's information, there's an intelligent mind behind it. You wouldn't believe that a dictionary would suddenly come to fruition from an explosion in a printing press, right? And, oh, look at this lovely dictionary, You would assume that there would be somebody behind it that came up with this. I was listening to this scientist speak a couple of years ago by the name of John Polkinghorne, and he was talking about there was like 37 contingencies, he said, that had to be in place in the early picoseconds of the universe. Do you know what a picosecond is? It's the amount of time that it takes light to go across the breadth of one hair. That's like instantly. So there was 37 things that had to be in place at the very instant that the universe came into existence. And one of them he was talking about was the expanse of the universe and how everything is in perfect timing, perfect unison, and how did things not completely destroy? How the planets and the galaxies all working in perfect unison together. He said the chances of that actually happening was 1 to times 10 to the 40,000th power. And he looked at the class and he said this. He said, that is like taking aim at a 1 square inch target across the known universe 20 billion light years away and hitting it bullseye. He looked at the class and he said this, gentlemen, there's no free lunch. Somebody has to pay. In other words, this stuff doesn't just happen. And when you look at creation itself, Josh talked about that, and even in our very bodies. I was reading an article recently about, it's actually an atheist scientist was writing about how we as people learn language, and as a child at a very, very young age can learn to understand and speak language. He said, it's almost a miracle. There's an atheistic scientist that was writing this. But when you see this kind of information and this wonder of creation around us in the universe and even in the smallness of our own bodies, we say, somehow it just happened. There had to be some intelligent mind behind it. And the third evidence that's often given is the evidence of right and wrong, of morality. How is it that we understand what is right and wrong? Where does that come from? Josh also talked about that last night. We can go anywhere in the world and people understand that it's not right to kill and to steal things. Where does this come from? You know, you don't see animals doing this. You know, your lion ate my baby zebra and that is not right. You don't see that, do you? But people understand. That's why we have that's why we have laws and why we have courts. But animals don't do that. There's something within us that tells us that there is a right and a wrong. And Romans 1 talks about that. How he has written that in the laws of on our hearts, in our conscience. And it's given and speaks to us through creation itself. Where does this idea of consciousness come from? It comes from one who is the giver of right and wrong, of God himself. A fourth one I would also add to it is this. The evidence of a God is a transformed life. How did I be this way, and now I'm this way? What happened? You see God getting hold of a life and changing it. It's the greatest of all miracles, is a transformed life. When God takes a life and a will and changes it after him. But Christ, I would be out there, you see. Evidence for God. He that believes in him must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. God does exist. I believe it. And he has told us that also in his word. But the question is that we want to look at is, who is he? Who is God? And to try to answer that, I'd like to look at a passage in 2 Chronicles chapter 20. 2 Chronicles chapter 20. And I know this question of who is God is one of the greatest questions that we are ever going to talk about. And to really comprehensively look at this is something we'll be looking at for eternity, I think, understanding who God is. But hopefully it can be meaningful to us. as we look to try to answer this question, who are you, God? And what this is here is a prayer of Jehoshaphat. And Jehoshaphat was facing a huge army, an unknown future, and he was afraid. And he's going to pray is a prayer of passion, but also a theological soundness. A tremendous prayer here of Jehoshaphat. And in this prayer, he's going to ask 3 questions. And if you can try to pick them out as we go through, I'm going to use those as my outline here this morning, looking at this, answering this question. He's going to answer 3 questions, and he's going to answer them in this prayer. But here in 2 Chronicles chapter 20, verse 1, we'll read down to verse 13. And it came to pass after this also that the children of Moab and the children of Ammon, and with them also other besides of Ammonites, came against Jehoshaphat to battle. Then there came some that told Jehoshaphat, saying, There cometh a great multitude against thee from beyond the sea of this side Syria. And behold, they be in Hazazon Tamar, which is in En-gedi. And Jehoshaphat feared, and set himself to seek the Lord, and proclaimed a fast throughout all Judah. And Judah gathered themselves together to ask help of the Lord. Even out of all the cities of Judah they came to seek the Lord. And Jehoshaphat stood in the congregation of Judah and Jerusalem in the house of the Lord before the new court, and said, O Lord God of our fathers, art not thou God in heaven? And rulest not thou over all the kingdoms of the heathen, and in thy hands is there not power and might, so that none is able to withstand thee? Art not thou our God, who didst drive out the inhabitants of this land before thy people Israel, and gave it to the seed of Abraham thy friend forever? And they dwelt therein, and have built thee a sanctuary therein for thy name, saying, If, when evil cometh upon us, as a sword, judgment, or pestilence, or famine, we stand before this house and in thy presence, for thy name is in this house, and cry unto thee in our affliction, then thou wilt hear and help. And now behold, the children of Ammon and Moab and Mount Seir, whom thou wouldest not let Israel invade, when they came out of the land of Egypt, but they turned from them and destroyed them not. Behold, I say, how they reward us, to come to cast us out of thy possession, which thou hast given us to inherit. O our God, wilt thou not judge them? For we have no might against this great company that cometh against us, neither know we what to do, but our eyes are upon thee. And Judah stood before the Lord with their little ones, their wives, and their children. There are 3 questions that he asks here in this prayer. He says, Are you not the God of heaven? Did you not drive out the inhabitants? And will you not fight this battle for you? Are you not? Did you not? And will you not? If I could give you a piece of paper and ask you the question, who is God? What words would come to your mind? What ideas would come to your mind? Or how would you explain this to somebody? Who is God? At home, I have a magazine from way back in the 1900s. 1984, I think it is. It's a Life magazine that I came across. And the main title for the magazine, or the main article for the magazine was, Who is God? And what the author did was he went around and asked that question to many different people that he met in his life and around the world, really, to get their idea of who God is. And the first person in that article gave a beautiful testimony of who God was to her. She was an older woman, and she was in the hospital, and she was dying. And he asked her, who is God to you? And she said, God is the one that I have walked with all my life, one who saved me at a young age, who has strengthened me throughout my life. And now as I lay here, ready to die, I'm looking forward to the time I can go home to see him face to face. Beautiful testimony of who God is. The second one in the article was of a preacher. And he had preached the word for many, many years, but he had lived a double life behind closed doors. And he was now in the hospital as well, and he was dying of AIDS because of the life that he was living. And he said, I preached the gospel all my life, but I never knew him. Now, as I lay here dying, I have come to realize who he really was. And he is the one now who has extended his hand of mercy and grace and forgiveness to me. Even though I lived a life of sin all those years, he has now offered me that hand of forgiveness, and I'm ready to go. Another beautiful testimony of who God is. But as you continue reading through the article, this man interviewed a Hindu person, and who's God to you? And well, God is all around us, you see. He's in nature, and he's in the air, and he's within and without. He's everywhere. That's who God is to him. That's how he sees it. And he asked a Muslim man, he said, well, God is Allah. He's high and mighty, and inshallah, I might make it. I don't know. I don't really know him real, but I hope I can get to heaven someday to see him. I don't know, but that's who God is to him. And he talked to an atheistic person, and well, God is just some opiate of the people. You just make these things up to make yourself feel good. That's how he sees God. And you come to the end of the whole article, and the author himself shares what his opinion is. Well, to him, God is a force. Like, may the force be with you type of thing. You just use the force. It's a force that's out there that you just use for your own good. And you get done reading something like that, or even talking to people like that, and you may think to yourself, is this it? Is that how it really is? Each person has their experience of who God is, and that's what you go on, and that's where I was raised, and that's how I understand God. That's how it is. I'd like to read for you a couple of verses from 2 Peter that have been just so precious to me. 2 Peter chapter 1. And Peter's a man that I've always loved. He was always quick to speak, and he always had something to say. But he is going to talk about an experience that he had that very few people got to see. And it is his experience on the Mount of Transfiguration. A mountaintop experience for anybody to go through. But listen to what he says here in 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 16. He says this, for we have not followed cunningly devised fables when we made known unto you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, but were eyewitnesses of his majesty. He's talking about the Mount of Transfiguration. He was up there with Peter, James, and John, and the body of our Lord became whiter and whiter, and Moses and Elijah were there, and Peter's like, wow, we never want to leave this place. This is awesome. Build some tabernacles. I never want to go back down. This is amazing. We saw this. We were there. In verse 17, for he received from God the Father honor and glory when there came such a voice to him from the excellent glory. This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. And this voice which came from heaven we heard when we were with him in the holy mount. But listen to what he says in verse 19 here. But we have also a more sure word of prophecy, whereunto you do well that you take heed, as unto a light that shineth in a dark place, until the day dawn and the day star arise in your hearts. Knowing this first, that no prophecy of the Scriptures of any private interpretation. For the prophecy came not in old time by the will of man, but holy men of God spake as they were moved by the Holy Ghost. There is something even more sure than any experience we can have, and that is the more sure word of prophecy right here. You want to know who God is? This is where we go. More sure word of prophecy. Our experiences in life are very important. They really shape who we are. But sometimes our experiences in life can leave us down. Where are you, God? Who are you really? We go through the ups and downs of life. But I think what's going to be able to carry us through is the more sure word of prophecy, which you do well to take heed to, as unto a light that shineth into a dark place, until the day dawn and the day of star rise in your hearts. This is where we want to go to understand him. Well, maybe you leave the common person and his experiences, and you want to turn to the philosophers of life. Can they explain God to me? The podcasts and the big speakers, I've come to realize that I sort of enjoy philosophy. I can say that out loud. I'm not sure. Sort of interesting to me. I've sort of enjoyed it. I heard a sort of a funny little story. I don't know if you ever heard of Sherlock Holmes. Anyone, you guys know who Sherlock Holmes is? Okay, yep, you know who he is. All right. He was one of the greatest Scotland Yard detectives. He could solve any mystery. And the story goes that Sherlock Holmes and his sidekick Watson were going out on a camping trip one weekend, and after they set their tent there, and after some liquid refreshments and eating there, they crawled into their tent and went to sleep. In the middle of the night, Sherlock Holmes wakes up and knocks Watson awake. He said, "Watson, wake up!" Watson wakes up, and Holmes says, "Look up into the sky. What do you see?" And he says, "I see millions and millions of stars." And Holmes says, "Watson, what does that tell you?" And Watson thought a little bit. And he said, "Well, ecologically speaking, it tells me it's about 3 o'clock in the morning. And meteorologically speaking, it tells me that tomorrow's going to be a pretty nice day. And theologically speaking, it tells me that there's a mighty God who created all this massive universe, and compared to it all, I am but a speck of dust." "Why, Holmes? What does it tell you?" He said, "Watson, you idiot, somebody stole our tent." It's easy sometimes to get caught up, I think, with the big ideas and the big words. And we can end up worshiping ideas more than the God himself who's behind it all. When Jesus was explaining the kingdom of heaven to the people, he didn't take any great philosopher or theologian. He took a little child and said in the midst of them, "Such is the kingdom of heaven." That's it. To have that simple childlike faith to believe. I enjoy thinking big. I understand that. But it says, unless you become like a child, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. It's very important for us to have that faith. And so we can leave these big thinkers and maybe turn to a theologian. And maybe we're getting closer now. Well, theologians talk about God in many different ways. The book of Revelation, the theologians talk about there's 4 main ideas that are given of God. They say that he is sovereign, that he is holy, that he is omniscient, and that he is immutable. God is sovereign. God is holy. God is omniscient, meaning that he knows everything, and that he is immutable. He's unchanging. Wonderful words and ideas to think about, to think of him as sovereign, especially as you look at the idea of what's going on in our world today, in our nation, in the world at large, really, and the chaos that is happening around us. To rest in the fact that God is sovereign. We can trust him. He's in control of these things. But there's also a difficult side to sovereignty that we also have to face. In the first 5 years of being in the ministry, I was a part of 4 different funerals. 3 of them were of people 25 years and younger. One of them was a little child from our church. There was a family that was unable to have children. A couple was unable to have children, and so they adopted. And it was a beautiful thing to see. They had tried for many years to have children and were unable to do it, and so they adopted this little girl. And it was a wonderful thing to see when they would come into church. This little girl would always be on her dad's arm, and usually one arm around his shoulder, and they would walk in. And to see the love that they had between father and this little daughter. And this little daughter had a heart murmur that they were working with, and the doctor said that she, with some medication, she'll grow out of it and she'll be able to live a normal life. But one morning, the mother went in to wake her up, and she didn't respond. And so she walked into the bedroom and began rubbing her back underneath her nighty shirt there to help her wake up. And the mother realized that her daughter was cold. And so she quickly gathered her up and took her out into the hallway for better light, and saw her face and the blue marks starting to form on her face. And she realized she was dying. And she was a nurse, and so she began doing CPR on her little daughter. And by that moment, her husband had forgotten his lunch and stepped back through the door to get it. And she cried out, "Irvin, call 911. Kiara's gone." 2 years old. And I preached that sermon. I preached at that funeral. And as I sat with this man and we cried together, and he said, "How can this be? Why God didn't give us children? He gave us some precious girl that he loved." You could see it, the relationship the father and the daughter had together. And all of a sudden we say, sovereignty of God. Is that what we say? And all of a sudden the sovereignty of God doesn't seem so special anymore to us. If God was all powerful, why not keep her? What happened here? Look at this idea of holiness. A wonderful idea. We can trust him because he's holy. He is pure. There's no hypocrisy in him whatsoever. He is wonderful. He is perfect and pure. There's no evil or sin within him at all. And we can trust him because of that. But there's also a difficult side to this holiness to think about. That someday you and I are going to stand before a holy God and have to give an account for our life. That we are going to be judged by that standard of perfect holiness. And if that sin is not dealt with, we're going to answer and bear our own sin. You look at that idea of omniscient, that God knows everything. God knows what each one of you are going through, and each struggle that you face right now. Maybe nobody else knows it but you. He knows. He knows what you're going through and what burden you're carrying. But the other side of it is that God knows what sin you also are in. He knows. Nothing is hid from him. And the idea of immutable, unchanging, again, it's a special thing, no hypocrisy within him. But we ourselves are changing people. And sometimes we don't live like we ought to as changing. I think that's why we love faithfulness in people, because that's how God is. He is unchanging from yesterday to today for forever. What we long for is his forgiveness and mercy and love, don't we? But God is also sovereign, and he's holy, and he's omniscient and immutable. Can we bring these things together? Is it possible to bring these things together? In Hebrews chapter 1, verse 1, the Bible tells us how God has revealed himself to us. In Hebrews chapter 1, verse 1, it says this: God who at sundry times and in divers manners spake in time past unto the fathers by the prophets, hath in these last days spoken unto us by his Son, whom he hath appointed heir of all things, by whom also he made the worlds, who being the brightness of his glory and the express image of his person, and upholding all things by the word of his power, when he had by himself purged our sins, sat down on the right hand of the majesty on high. God has revealed himself to us through his Son. I would like to take you to a garden where the Son is praying. And he's praying, "Let this cup pass from me. Let this cup pass from me." Have you ever prayed that in life? Let this cup pass from me, please. Yet not my will, but thine be done. How was Jesus able to say that? I think the answer comes at the beginning of his prayer when he says this: Holy Father. Holy Father. How did Jesus reveal God to us? He revealed him to us as this: as our Holy Father. Holiness sets him high and lifted up. He's different than us. He is our creator. He is sovereign. He is omniscient. He is immutable. But Father brings him near in love and forgiveness and mercy. And when we bend our knee to him as holy, as our sovereign, as our creator, as our Lord, he comes near to us and picks us up and calls us his son. and we look at him and say, Holy Father. This idea of family runs throughout the Bible. The Bible starts with a marriage and it ends with a marriage. And this whole idea of family runs throughout it all. And so my answer to this is, who are you, God? Are you not my Holy Father? Then he says this, did you not? Did you not lead us in the past? Many times when the people of Israel were facing an unknown future, the leader of that time would often stand up and remind the people of God's faithfulness to them in the past. Moses did that when they were getting ready to go into Jordan. Jehoshaphat does that. Stephen does that just before he's stoned. He goes back through the whole history of Israel. Jesus did that on the road to Emmaus there, to the two guys. He said, did not our hearts burn within us? He went back through all the prophets and told them about himself, of what God had done. The Bible really is a history book of God's faithfulness to his people. And so I want to ask you this question. Have you seen God working in your life? Have you seen him working in your life? We live at a time when things have been going very well for us. But it seems as if we have begun to forget God. I came across a little story of a Hungarian man by the name of Marcel Sternberger. It's from the Reader's Digest. And he was a Hungarian man who came across during the World War II. And he was a man of habit, the story goes, and he would every morning he would get up the same time, he'd get on the same subway train in New York City, and he would go to the same job every day. Man of habit, man of habit. But one day he got a call that his friend was sick across town, and so he decided to go visit him. And so he got on a different railroad train car and head off to meet his friend. And as he got in his car, it was a very, very, very full car, and no seats were available. But just before the train was ready to take off, a man quickly jumped out of his seat and ran off the train. And so Marcel Sternberger sat down beside this man. And as he was sitting there beside him, he noticed that he was reading a Hungarian newspaper. And it was written in Hungarian, and he just thought, well, maybe I would have a connection with him, being Hungarian myself. And he looked over and he saw he was looking in the one ads. And he asked him, sir, I noticed you're looking at one ads. Are you looking for a job? And he said, no, I'm looking for my wife. And he told his story about how he was over in Hungary, and during the war he had been captured by the Nazis and been taken to a concentration camp, but he thought his wife had escaped to America. And now that the war was over, he was coming over to see if he could find her. He said, I thought maybe I would find her in the one ads. Maybe she put an article here that I could perhaps find her. And so Marcel, I asked him, well, what is your name? He said, my name is Bella Paskin. And he said, what's your wife's name? He said, it's Maria Paskin. And he thought to himself, and he reached into his wallet, and he pulled out a dog-eared piece of paper, and he had a name written on there, Maria Paskin, and a phone number. Ella, would you get off the train station with me the next stop? I'd like to make a phone call. And so they get off, and they walked into the phone booth there, and he called the number on his piece of paper, and he said, Maria, this is Marcel Sternberger. We had met at a party a couple of weeks ago, and I just ask you, what is the name of your husband? And she said, it's Bella Paskin. And they began talking, and he realized this was her husband. And so he reached out through the door and said, here, Bella, take the phone. And within 10 seconds, he began screaming, it's my Maria. It's my Maria. The article ends with this statement, which I thought was just tremendous. It says, skeptical persons would no doubt attribute the events of that memorable afternoon to mere chance. But was it chance that made Sternberger suddenly decide to visit his sick friend, and hence take a subway line that he had never been on before? Was it chance that caused the man sitting by the door of the car to rush out just as Sternberger came in? Was it chance that caused Bella Paskin to be sitting beside Sternberger reading a Hungarian newspaper? Was it chance? Or did God ride the Brooklyn subway that afternoon? Is your life a chance? Are you here by chance? Is your life is a mistake that happened? Or does God have you here for a purpose? And he's been calling you to himself. I became a Christian when I was 11 years old. Pete Peters was our evangelist. Some of you would know him. I still love to hear him preach. He preached at a ministers' conference a couple of years ago. And you know how the Bible says, how beautiful are the feet of them that bring good news? I said, that's exactly right. The one who brought me the good news, I still appreciated. But I was always too scared. I was a very shy person as a young person, and I was too scared to walk up front. And so that night, or after one evening, I went home and told my mom and dad I want to become a Christian. And we knelt down by our old brown sofa, dad on one side, mom on the other. I said, Lord, I'm a sinner. You save me. I still have that brown sofa. It's down in my basement. My children are going to get it when I'm leaving. Just kidding. But sometimes I'll go down there and remember this is where it all began for me. It was a wonderful experience for me. And my heart was lightened and I was saved. But as I went through my teenage years, I began questioning a lot of life, what we believed and how we lived and what is really right here. How am I supposed to live? And so I started going down a path that was not good. There was about a 2-year period in my life I didn't have my devotions one time. It was a very dark time of my life. I didn't care. And I loved music and movies, very much so. Rock music, loved it. And I was about 18, and I could always talk with my parents about these things, and I always appreciated it. I could always talk to them about it. I don't know how that always happened. I don't know why that was, but I was always able to talk with them about my life and what I was going through. But I was going to do what I wanted. And then I was about maybe 18 or 19 years old. Me and my buddies decided we're going to go to a concert, a rock concert. There's a Christian rock concert, but we're going to go there and rock out. It's going to be fun. And if you go to these concerts, what often happens is at the beginning, there's an act that everyone just stays in their seats, and that's what we did. They're just there to get the crowd warmed up, get your emotions going, to get ready for the real guys that are coming out. I remember as they got done and they walked off the stage, me and my buddies who were sitting jumped out of our seats and ran to the front of the church up against the stage. And I was standing right there at the front of the stage, right in front of what the lead singer was going to sing. I said, this is it. This is what I'm looking for. It's going to be awesome. And as we waited for the group to come out, the lights went out and the fog started coming up off the stage, and the lights were flashing through the church. And everyone raised their fist to the air and began chanting for this group. Chanting for the group to come out. And then the group comes out and everyone started screaming, for this group. At home, my mom was praying for me. I hate it when mom prayed. Stuff would always happen. One time my mom told me, if you don't slow down, Kevin, I'm going to pray that you wreck. I'm like, what kind of prayer is that? Thanks a lot. I wrecked. That's what happened. And so I learned something, that when mom prays, stuff happens. It does. And I just tell you, moms, not to give up praying. It does something. Well, here I was. This is the ultimate that I was looking for. But as I stood there at the front of that group, with everybody fist in the air, chanting for this group to come out, a thought came to my mind very clearly. Kevin, you're not worshiping me, you're worshiping them. I said, that's exactly what I'm doing. What am I doing? You're not worshiping me, you're worshiping them. And as I think about different things in my life, God has called me in many different ways, calling me to himself. There's some verses in Acts 17 I'd like to read to you here. It's another wonderful verses for me. Acts 17, and what this is This is the philosophers of the day, the Epicureans and the Stoics. And Paul was going to go here and talk with these great philosophers, Mars Hill. And whatever happened on Mars Hill was considered to be the truth, because they would hash it out, and whatever they decided was considered to be the truth. And this is where Paul goes to. And he says here, he's talking about the unknown God, the altar to the unknown God. In verse 23, he says this: "For as I passed by and beheld your devotion, I found an altar with this inscription, To the unknown God, whom therefore ye ignorantly worship, him declare I unto you. God that made the world and all things therein, seeing that he is Lord of heaven and earth, dwelleth not in temples made with hands, neither is worshipped with men's hands as though he needeth anything, seeing he giveth to all life and breath and all things, and hath made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on all the face of the earth." And listen to this: "And hath determined the times before appointed, and the bounds of their habitation, that they should seek the Lord, if happily they might feel after him and find him, though he be not far from any one of us." God has put you in the times you are and the place that you're in. For what purpose? In the home that you're in the time that you're living in. For what purpose? That perhaps you might seek after him and find him, though he be not far from any one of us. God is not far from any one of you. And if you're running from him today, he's calling you back to himself because he loves you. That perhaps you might feel after him and find him, though he be not far from any one of us. Lord, did you not lead us and fight for us in the past? And last of all is this: will you not carry us into the future? Lord, will you not carry me into the future? How much do we long for that? Lord, help me, please. Carry me and take me home. Well, a man by the name of Jehaziel stands up, and he gives them the reply from the Lord. This is what is found in 2 Chronicles chapter 20 and verse 15. This here is the middle verse of the Old Testament. It's fascinating to me. Middle verse of the Old Testament. And this is what Jehaziel says to them. He says this. He says, "Hearken ye all Judah and ye inhabitants of Jerusalem, and thou King Jehoshaphat. Thus saith the Lord unto you, Be not afraid, nor dismayed by reason of this great multitude, for the battle is not yours, but God's." The battle is not yours, but God's. The only way that you and I can really say that in life, though, is if God has first conquered the battle that is right in here. I surrender. Surrender my life, Lord. I don't know what battle you're going through or what wrestling is going on in your heart between you and God. But the only way we can really say, Lord, take me, fight this, is if God has first conquered us right in here. I surrender. When Saul was on the road to Damascus, breathing out threatenings against him, God met him there in a dramatic way. He said, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" He said, "It's hard for you to kick against the pricks." Do you know what that means? He says, "Why do you keep bloodying yourself against the markers I've been putting in your life?" Stephen was one of them. God puts these markers in our life to call us back to him. And Saul said this, "What do you want me to do, Lord? What would you have me do, Lord?" And so if God has been speaking to you, that is the answer he's looking for. Lord, what do you want me to do? The songwriter writes this: "Long my imprisoned spirit lay, fast bound in sin and nature's night. Thine eye diffused a quickening ray. I awoke, my dungeon flamed with light. My chains fell off, my heart went free. I rose, went forth, and followed thee." My friends, God does exist. I believe that with all my heart. Who is he? Are you not my holy Father, did you not lead me in the past? And Lord, will you not carry me into the future? Have faith, because the battle is not yours, but God's. Shall we pray?